I hope that you had a great week of getting to score some great Black Friday deals. Who got to go out and get some great deals? Who did some Black Friday shopping from their couch? Absolutely, absolutely right. Who actually went out and joined the lines at stores? Yes, Brian, you brave man. You brave man. But listen, it's wild to me how Black Friday has evolved over the years. Now, if you're not familiar, it's been an American tradition for quite a long time to go shopping on the Friday after Thanksgiving. Actually, it's really late 1800s, early 1900s. It's just been this practice where families they'd gather for Thanksgiving and then they'd head into the city for Black Friday shop. Maybe there'd be a parade in their local city or whatever it is, and then all the retail stores would open up their shops on Friday, and they'd go in and they'd take advantage of some deals. And what's fascinating is, especially in the city of Philadelphia, this was a major tradition. Actually, backing up all the way to 1899, the Army and Navy football game tradition started where on the Saturday after Thanksgiving, the two teams would play, and people would come into the city on, they'd say, let's go for a family drive, right, back in those days, and they'd get in the car together like, really, Mom? Really, Dad? We're going to get in the car? Right? They'd get in the car, they'd drive on into the city, and they'd do their shopping, and then they'd enjoy the football game on Saturday. And even before the Lions would play and lose every Thanksgiving, before even that became like a tradition, right? They'd play, and so for much of the 1900s, this was a tradition all over, but especially in the city of Philadelphia. And what's fascinating, in the 1960s, the city really tried to really add some positive spin on it because people hated how crowded it was. People hated how it was shoulder to shoulder. They hated how people were rushing into stores. And so the city of Philadelphia tried to say, how about Big Friday? Let's call it Big Friday. Let's celebrate. Well, this still did not gain any traction. People still didn't enjoy it. And it wasn't until actually 25 years later when the phrase Black Friday was then regularly used, of course, to broadcast holiday shopping, and where it became a regular tradition across the nation where people would gather in these lines to be right when the doors open to go into a store. And I love how this picture is in black and white because it's from the 90s, and it's like back in the day, back in the time long ago in an ancient land, right, of Kmart in the 90s, right? But it's just this time, this era that these traditions settle in, and this becomes like this symbol of holiday shopping when now we can get to splurge and indulge and enjoy and take advantage of these deals that are on the Friday after Thanksgiving. Well, then Black Friday would evolve again. If you remember, of course, the invention of the internet, and then in 2005, for the very first time, we would have Cyber Monday. And it would be a new kind of habit across our nation where people would go out on Friday. They'd line up early, early on Thursday night or early Friday morning. They'd be there right when the doors would open, right? But if they missed their deals or they didn't want to do that, they could then on Monday go and do their shopping. And that became a normal tradition. Well, then Black Friday would evolve again because in 2009, the national annual tradition of the Army and Navy football game would actually end. It would be pushed later to the year. And so just think, it went for 110 years. That's crazy to me. But the Saturday tradition of watching or listening to the Army and Navy football game was put away. So the very next year, our nation then introduced Small Business Saturday. And so now this splurging and this spending of Black Friday is now on Friday, and then now Saturday, and then also we're going to pause for Sunday but then go around the corner for Monday for Cyber Monday. Well, then in 2010s, we see this new trend take place where stores now are doing something wild where they're actually now offering their Black Friday deals more than just Black Friday. It wasn't just reserved for a day. It actually, we started to see this trend in the mid to late 2010s where now it was common for retailers to offer their sales throughout the entire month. And so now it wouldn't just be excluded to a day or a Monday or 2 days, but not just a weekend, but now to much of November. And then in 2015, it still evolved again, where Amazon launched for the first time what they called Prime Day, and they would advertise it with the language that it's more deals than Black Friday. And this would happen every July, every year since. These traditions, these habits, and it's fascinating to watch how it has rapidly evolved. And while there are some who want to blame, retailers for spoiling the holidays and making it all about buying stuff, listen, we can't ignore the fact that they wouldn't do it if it didn't work. They wouldn't do it if it didn't work. And it is now easier than ever to take advantage of a good deal when we see it, and we get obsessed, we get excited, and we love to tell people, like, guess how much, like, guess what I paid for this, or whatever, guess I stayed up till however much late at night, and, this is maybe back in the day where we'd go, we were the first ones into Best Buy, we were the first ones into Walmart, right, back in those days. Now, don't hear me, I love, of course, getting to, I love not having to wait in line. I love not having to then try to time it right just for Friday to take advantage of it. I love the modern evolution of Black Friday and how it is easier than ever to score some deals. But we can't ignore the reality that this invite to indulge is taking advantage of a very specific way in which our humanity is very broken. Because to see how it has progressed in just a short bit of time, in the last 40 years, just to imagine to see what would happen in the next few decades and how it would become even more, and how consuming this can be in our culture and our society. You see, it was the very first lie given to humanity that was said to Eve about the fruit of the tree that God told her not to eat. The enemy said to her that you are not enough without it. This first lie that, maybe God is holding you back. You aren't enough unless you have this. God is trying to keep you down. You could be more than what you are if you just had it. All you need is just a little bit more, just one more bite, and then you'll be set, and then you'll be happy, and then you'll be good, and then you'll be what it feels like to be full. And understand that since the fall of early Genesis, this very lie has become an unrelenting appetite in our soul. You see, just as we talked about at the beginning of this series, where perfectionism isn't about healthy striving for excellence, it's about the belief that you must be perfect to be acceptable. Friends, I need us to understand as we step into today's conversation that our belief that we must be perfect to be accepted stems from the idea that we are not enough and that our life is not enough. And understand this message is amplified during the holidays. We see the movies where people fall in love, where maybe they are kind of like teasing each other, and then it's so romantic and gushy, and they fall in love, and it's so passionate and lively, and we look over at our spouse, and we're like, oh, just look at them being so in love. We look at our spouse, and they're like burping the ABCs, right? And they're like, I don't know my wife could do that. Like, that's crazy to me. And then see, we see commercials where families are so happy on Christmas morning, and we're troubled because ours is more chaotic and crazy, and it's not quite like, oh, wow, like, oh, thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. Oh, thank you, whoever. We see this and we're troubled that ours isn't that way. We scroll through social media and we see how everyone else has just a perfect life, and they're getting to travel for the holidays or get their kids cool presents, or other people are getting new iPhones or new shoes or whatever it is. And we're like, man, I really wish I had that. Man, we kind of feel like we're missing out. FOMO kicks in all the more, and we feel like this sense of not being enough and just wishing maybe we had that, and then we'd have the smile attached to it. Maybe I would feel better about my life. And friends, my hope this morning is that we can acknowledge this very real tension that the holiday season tends to make us feel insufficient and feel like our life isn't good enough. It's a real reality. the advertisements, the movies. I know they're great stories that we enjoy, but we can't help but ignore this natural kind of outcome. And we watch it, we just wish maybe ours is a little more Hallmark-like. It's a real reality. And friends, this morning, what I hope that we can discover together is that God's gift of contentment enables us to find joy as we peacefully accept our life. And now, right now, I say that, and maybe you don't like the words in that sentence. But my hope for today as we walk through the story of a man in the Old Testament, that maybe your heart and mind would be changed. In the Old Testament, the third person to become king over Israel was King Solomon. At the start of his leadership, God invited Solomon to ask the Lord for whatever he wanted, and Solomon asks God for wisdom. This pleased the Lord. God granted Solomon all this wisdom. He was the wisest person to ever live, and through that, God enabled him to build their nation of Israel into a mighty fortress, into a mighty nation. It was more powerful and more impressive than it had ever been. Solomon was king for 40 years, and in the first half, he set out to build the temple for people to gather and worship the Lord. We read about this in 1 Kings, in these wild moments where God is using Solomon to build this glorious, beautiful temple for the presence of God to dwell among his people. Then Solomon builds the palace, and between the two, the temple took 7 years and the palace took 13 years. It takes about 20 years for Solomon and his kingship to build all of this stuff, and it's remarkable and it stuns every person who comes and sees it. And we read about King Solomon in 1 Kings chapters 3 through 11. That's where we read about his life, and there's parts of Chronicles as well too, but this is the bulk of it. And in chapter 9, we see the Lord is pleased with Solomon, that he has done a great job at building the temple and the palace, all of it to honor the Lord, all of it to again, praise and bring glory to God. But then we start to see something happen in chapter 10 where things begin to change. You see, for the first time, actually, perhaps for the first time, not only just as Solomon is king, but also before his father David or before Saul were ever king, for the first time, a diplomat from another foreign nation travels a very long way to come see them. Now, there are other diplomats. There are other people who come from closer territories and closer regions to come visit the Israelite people. But no one has ever traveled as far as a woman named Queen of Sheba. She comes from a part of Africa that is so further south. Today we believe it's around Ethiopia or even further south. And because her name kind of refers to Queen of the southern territory of Africa, this region up against kind of the ocean. And she travels further than anyone because she's heard about all the success that Solomon has had. And she just had to come see it for herself. She comes and she gives honor to Solomon. And Solomon also exchanges that honor to her. And it's this rather fascinating moment where the first time someone who is so removed, so far away from the people of God, for the very first time they come and they are just, wow. They come and they're just like, we've heard about you all the way over there. Yeah, way over there. You know that direction, if you keep walking, and then you just keep going. And you don't stop, and then you just keep going a little further. Like, we're way over there. We've never even met, but I've heard of you. You've been this tiny little thing for so long. You've been like so unestablished. You've been so unimpressive. But I've heard these stories of how amazing you are, and I had to come travel. And believe me, it was long, right? We couldn't just jump into an airplane and fly. We had to travel all this way because I just had to see how impressive everything is. It's the first time that something like that happens among the people of God, and it happened while Solomon was king. Then what's unique is that in the latter part of chapter 10 in 1 Kings, we then see this summary moment where it just highlights It's not a chronological order of events. It just highlights a summary of all of Solomon's accomplishments and how impressive he is. And actually says in 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 23, that after even Queen Sheba comes and visits, that there are other two. It says in verse 23, it says, King Solomon became richer and wiser than any other king on earth. People from every nation came to consult him and to hear the wisdom God had given him. Year after year, everyone who visited brought him gifts of silver and gold, clothing, weapons, spices, horses, and mules. It talks about how all these people are coming and they're so impressed by Solomon and what he has accomplished. And then all of this, his heart is beginning to change. And we first especially notice this, frankly, just a few verses further. Because chapter 10 ends celebrating all what he has accomplished and how he has horses from around the world. And it's so impressive. And it even says how expensive they are. And he's like, I paid for all of them in cash. I have that much money. And in chapter 11 it says, now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, from Ammon, from Edom, from Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them, because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. Wow. Notice how it says he has this many wives from royal birth. It is all these nations who would come and visit him, and they would say, please, we want to be friends with you, so please, would you marry, my daughter? She's, a prince of our nation, or whatever it could be. They'd marry kind of in that way to create these alliances between nations. God told the people of Israel to not do that. Solomon did it anyway. Friends, for the remaining years of King Solomon's kingship, his heart would be absent from the Lord. And God would actually then confront him here pretty soon. And then the Lord would actually then say, listen, I'm not going to tear it away from you. I'm actually going to tear the kingdom away from your son who comes behind you. But what I am going to do now is I'm actually going to raise up adversaries who are going to come, and they are going to be such a thorn in your side. They are going to be that pebble in your shoe, and they're going to annoy you like crazy. And this now starts to happen as the Lord raises up all his adversaries until the day he dies. And after Solomon passes away, then right immediately, the people of God, the kingdom of Israel, what was so once impressive and incredible, would then be divided and split in half. And then for the next 345 years, after Solomon passes away, for the next 345 years, they would slowly start to decay and implode and self-destruct until then they didn't exist at all. Now, we don't read about it here in 1 Kings. But there has to be a moment, there is a moment where at some point near when Solomon passes away, he reflects on his rebellion against God. And with a heart full of regret, he then writes this book of wisdom and this book of encouragement of what people should really live for, because he lived for everything. He had it all. This part of him that was never satisfied, this part of him that never had enough of anything, well, he went and he had all of it, and it still wasn't good enough. And so he writes the book of Ecclesiastes, and it's put in the Old Testament. It's 12 chapters long, and he echoes this message over and over again. Everything is meaningless. Everything is meaningless without God. But he begins it in this way in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 1 through 8. He says these words. He says, these are the words of the King David, of the teacher, King David's son, who ruled in Jerusalem. He says, everything is meaningless, says the teacher, completely meaningless. What do people get for all their hard work under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth never changes. The sun rises and the sun sets, then hurries around to rise again. The wind blows south and then turns north around, and around it goes, blowing in circles. He says this, I love this part. He says, rivers run into the sea, but the sea is never full. Then the water returns again to the rivers and flows out again to the sea. Everything is wearisome beyond description, he says. No matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are not content. He's pulling back the curtain of his human life, and he says, listen, just as there are these endless cycles of nature where he uses the imagery of how the rivers flow into the ocean and then how the ocean is never spilling over, it's never full, and then the water returns. It's this endless cycle. So it is true in our life where we consume, we hunt, we devour, we indulge, we create things, we work, we build things, we experiment, we try new things, but we are never satisfied. And yet again, we return to where we are. He says later in verses 16 through 18, he says, I said to myself, look, I am wiser than any of the kings who ruled in Jerusalem before me. I have greater wisdom and knowledge than any of them. So I set out to learn everything from wisdom to madness and folly. But I learned firsthand that pursuing all of this is like chasing the wind. And then he writes in verse 18, the greater my wisdom, the greater my grief. To increase knowledge only increases sorrow. Solomon tells of how he strived to be better, to be smarter, to be wiser than any other king. And even in chapter 2, he echoes all of this again. And he says how I was better than everyone else in my accomplishments and what I achieved and how much knowledge I had. And he says, but yet as everything increased, my sorrow and grief increased right along with it. The more my accomplishments impressed people, the less impressive they became to me. Solomon, out of his regret, is trying to help us realize that we can try to measure who we are by others around us, but it will only bring us misery. And this is what I have to make sure we grab a hold of, is that God's gift of contentment protects us from drowning in comparison and the pressure to keep up with others, and especially the pressure to feel like we need to be better than those around us. Could you imagine a world where people didn't compare themselves to others based on what version of the iPhone they had or what type of school they went to or what kind of house they lived in? Imagine a world where the young adult who goes straight into the workforce is celebrated as much as the young adult who goes off to college. Imagine a world where the presents we can afford and we can't afford have nothing to do with how great of a mom or dad we are. Friends, and after 5 minutes of scrolling through Instagram, we feel like a complete failure. And then maybe we perhaps really need to assess that reality and take a break from something that our heart is consuming in such an unhealthy way. We talk a lot about the dark side of social media from the poster's perspective, but we don't talk enough about the perspective of the viewer. We can't control what other people put out there, but we can certainly control what we look at and consume and how much of it so. And if scrolling creates these feelings of failure, creates these feelings of inadequacy, of not being enough, or thinking that our people in our life are not enough for us, friends, we have to remove this cancerous thing from our life and create habits around it, because we scroll through our line and it's like these shovels that our heart in such an unhealthy way consumes, where, man, I'm not good enough as a wife, or we think, man, my wife isn't good enough. Man, I see this other person, I don't even know who they are, but I see their happiness and the things their husband does for them. Man, my husband is horrible. Man, he's not a very good man. He should be better like this person who we don't even know. We say, man, my kids are this way, or we scroll through and say, man, my parents, man, these other kids have such cooler parents. I wish they were my head. We just compare left, or we heap these mounds on each other. And maybe it's time for us to bring back the good old days where we looked out the window in the car when we drove down the road. Imagine we maybe bring back these habits where we watch the raindrops on the window race each other down to the bottom, right? I love his book. John Mark Comer writes about this habit of removing hurriness and rushing out of our life. He speaks heavily on this reality where our phones consume us in such an unhealthy way, where it all the more feeds into this comparison, this message in us that we are not enough and we're not good enough and our life isn't good enough. And it encourages and it stirs and kicks up all this dust in our life. But God's gift of contentment protects us from drowning in those lies and that message. God's gift of contentment keeps the pressure off from having to be as cool as the parents across the street or be like the other kid in class or to be like the other person who just seems to be knocking it out of the park and everything. God's gift of contentment keeps the pressure off. And it's so good. And Solomon is echoing this as someone who achieved everything. Someone who people traveled from hundreds and thousands of miles to come and see how cool he was. He says, listen, that still wasn't enough for me. Solomon writes about this. He then shifts his talk about knowledge and accomplishments from chapters 1 and 2, and then he leans into a different topic in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. He says this in verse 10. He says, I have seen the burden God has placed on all of us, yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted, this is so important, he has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. He says later, verse 14, he says, and I know that whatever God does is final. Nothing can be added to it or taken from it. God's purpose is that for people should fear him. What is happening now has happened before. And what will happen in the future has happened before, because God makes the same things happen over and over again. It's the way in which the world operates, and God allows because of what humanity has pushed God out the back door. We let sin in the house, and it destroyed everything. And God said, listen, I can't live here with you if you want sin. It's me or sin, but you chose sin, and so I have to leave. So the Lord has left us in this mess that we have created for ourselves. And he says, listen, it all is this endless cycle. Change is always happening, but yet the one thing that we can be sure of is that nothing is constant, but yet also nothing is new. And with this, our human limits are revealed to us, how little control we have of this world around us, the people around us, and the life that we have. Friends, I hope we can see what Solomon is saying here, that God's gift of contentment gives us peace when we face what's outside of our control. You know what's interesting to me? I want to give you some homework, all right? The kids are heading back to school tomorrow, right? We can have some homework too, right? Right, church? It's okay. I want to encourage you to read Ecclesiastes this week, is just in your time alone with God. What's fascinating to me is the very next thing he says. After he writes all of this in chapter 3, he ends chapter 3 talking about how there are people who do horrible things and they get away with it. He says that there are people who hurt us and they get away with it. They never apologize. They're never taken into the law. They hurt families, they hurt people, and they get off scotch-free, it seems. It says this is a reality of the world of brokenness that we have created. And he echoes this message of, listen, there's a lot we cannot control. We can't control people around us. But God's gift of contentment gives us peace when we find ourselves in those moments of interaction where we really wish people would change. Listen, I've learned the hard way, maybe you have too, that no matter how much you try to love certain people, it won't fix them. There are people in our life, no matter how much we really try to love them, we should love them, we should be there for people, we should all those things. But that doesn't mean if I do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that it's a proven thing that they're automatically going to love us back, or they're going to be a better parent or a better sibling or a better friend or any of that. And no matter how much you pet a wolf, it will never turn into a sheep just by petting it. When a parent doesn't love their child the way they should, maybe they've left, or maybe they're present but they're not really caring all too much. That child grows up with all sorts of hurts, wondering what they did wrong to make their parent not love them. Even though there's nothing they did, even though there's nothing they could change to win the approval of their mom or dad who is gone, this message, this lie, this toxic evil that is inside of us that says we're not enough, I must be better so that maybe they'll come love me, maybe I've done something wrong. It is echoing inside of our soul. And God's gift of contentment brings peace to us with the things that we cannot change. We cannot change others. And so it brings this peace and this assurance into our life of us knowing that we've done what God has told us to do. And maybe right now it's painful what's happening in the interactions between us. But listen, we're going to do what is pleasing and honoring to God, and we're going to pray that the Lord brings about transformation in the life of the other. Friends, it's rather terrifying, the impact that people can have on others. You hear stories, we have stories where we say that a teacher in elementary school said that we'll never be good enough, and yet here we are as an adult trying to prove them wrong. We hear messages of how, our grandparents said that we'll never amount to anything, or my parents said that my sibling was better than me and that I'd never be as good as my sibling. We hear these messages. It's terrifying how these things are so casually thrown out into the world and into family trees and into people's lives, and how it just grabs a hold and it lingers there for decades and years to come. And this is where God's gift of contentment brings healing to our soul. And friends, as the one who is trying to be enough, we have to point our attention to Jesus, the one who made us and says that we are his child. And for those that we want to help but can't, we must trust them to the Lord and remain faithful to what God has told us to do and to what he has called us to be. I think of this moment, and I remember there was a year of frustration, and I remember reading through Exodus, and I remember reading through the moments of Moses, where Moses just is constantly, these people are complaining to him left and right? They come out of Egypt, and they're like, Moses, I kind of miss Egypt. And he's like, but you're free now. He's like, but you're free, no one's whipping you. You're like, yeah, but the beds were better back there, and here we're sleeping on the ground. He's like, but you're free. You're like, yeah, but I miss Egypt, and they're complaining. And Moses has this moment. He's like, listen, Lord, they're your problem. They're not my people. These are your people, Lord. So you deal with their problems, because I can't. Maybe perhaps we need to have this posture of Moses, Lord, they may be my sibling, and I do love them. But Lord, they're yours, please. They're your child. You need to help them. You need to take care of them, God, because I can't. I've tried. They may be my child or my parent, my friend, my coworker, or whoever. But Lord, they're yours. They're yours first before they were ever mine. So God, please, 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 Lord, please help. God's gift of contentment brings peace. It gives peace when we face what's outside of our control. And there's a lot of that this season. Throughout Ecclesiastes, Solomon presses firmly into these core topics of knowledge and wisdom and what we can accomplish and achieve, relationships and people in our life. But he talks a lot about money and wealth. He talks a lot about as someone who earned all of it. It's wild to read in 1 Kings chapter 10. It says that Solomon had so much money that all of the silver he had, it was worthless. Could you just imagine, all the silver he had, it didn't matter. He had so much other money. He had so much of it that really, if he dropped a 1,000-pound bag of silver, it's just not worth it to get because I have so much. It's he has that much, friends. But he says this in Ecclesiastes 5, starting in verse 10. He says, those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. He says in verse 13, there is another serious problem I've seen under the sun. Hoarding riches harms the saver. Notice he doesn't bash the saver, he celebrates it, but this posture of hoarding and this posture of needing and never having enough, and this scarcity posture he speaks to. He says in verse 15, we all come into the end of our lives as naked and empty-handed as the day we were born. We can't take our riches with us. Solomon is not speaking ill of working hard and building wealth. He has other moments where he talks about needing to prove ourselves through what we achieve, but he heavily emphasizes throughout all the Ecclesiastes that all the stuff that we accumulate, it's not evil in itself, but looking for it to fill us, that is a road that leads to a dead end. God's gift of contentment stops us from looking to money to do for us what God can do. God's gift of contentment stops us from looking for money to do for us what only God can do. And let me be really, I feel like I need to kind of be clear in this. This is not just for like the ultra wealthy. When we scroll through things and we see people on yachts and all these mansions. This is for those who have a lot and for those who have little and everyone in between. Because frankly, the truth is that even those who have little can be angry and judgmental of those who have a lot. And to be very frank with you, to be very honest in this moment together, I think in my experience of most people I encounter, I think that more often people who have less tend to love money more than those who have a lot more. The reason why is because out of the circumstances of life, they believe these ideas that if I just had a little bit more, I'd be happy. If I could just make a little bit more per hour, then we wouldn't be stressed about money. If I just had more, like we'd be okay. And they're looking for money to do for them something that money can't do. Frankly, what only God can do. Back in February, we went through an entire series on this. Maybe to kind of rewind all the way back at the start of the year. I know it's like wild that it's already like holidays in November and December is right here. It's wild that it's already the end of 2025. But perhaps you remember we went through this series back in February called Living Rich. And I encourage you, we talked through this 4-part series about this reality where maybe we look too often for money to satisfy us in a way that it can't. And frankly, much like Adam and Eve, when God said, listen, I want to bless you with all of the garden, but don't do this over here. What they do, they said, okay, I'm going to enjoy all this, but I'm going to touch the one thing you told me not to touch. Too often the time God says, listen, enjoy all these blessings that money can bring into your life, but don't do this over here. Don't love it. When we say, oh, okay, I'm gonna do the one thing that you said not to do. And too often we're pulled that direction. And friends, it was a great series that we went through. And I encourage you, scroll back through the podcast, and you'll notice all through the month of February, you can re-listen to all of it. But friends, our struggle with money is more than just a math problem. Really what God reveals to us is a heart problem. It's a heart problem. I mean, a better vacation or a newer phone or a nicer car, none of these things will satisfy us the way we often expect them to, which is why we keep feeling like what we have is not enough. That's not enough. And that the presents we buy our kids aren't good enough. And so maybe we even apologize to them, sorry, I couldn't get you anything nicer. Because we feel this like, I'm sorry, I don't have more. I'm sorry I failed you. It's so much a part of our identity that it really darkens our heart in a way that is so normal in our homes. The Lord wants to bring joy into a time of the year of giving gifts and exchanging. And even if it's not this coolest thing in the world, it's still, hey, I thought of you and I appreciate you, and I want to celebrate you in this way. God's gift of contentment stops us from looking to money to do for us what only God can do. What I love next that Solomon writes, he says this at the end of chapter 5. He says, even so, I have noticed one thing, At least that is good. It is good for people to eat, drink, and enjoy their work under the sun during the short life God has given them, and to accept their lot in life. And it is a good thing to receive wealth from God and the good health to enjoy it, to enjoy your work and accept your lot in life. This indeed is a gift from God, he says. And then he says this here at the end. And this is what puzzles me the most. It says in verse 20 that God keeps such people so busy enjoying life that they take no time to brood over the past. God keeps us, when we're full of contentment, so busy enjoying life that we cannot heap and continue to dwell on these things of the past, these failures, these regrets, the hardships we've been in, all the things, the mistakes that we've made. When we have this contentment in our soul, we get to actually actively enjoy the season of life that we're in, even if there are things that we wish were different. And now I can't help but notice it seems like this last part has slipped in there. And this is Andre kind of speculating. So the next part of this roller coaster ride, know that this is Andre's brain, all right? And I'm open put it back, but I'm going to share just something that I can't help in my wandering mind wonder what's happening behind the scenes in Solomon's life. You see, as I start to connect the dots, and I see how Scripture lays out the life of Solomon, he was born out of a relationship that his dad had that started as an affair. Solomon's mom was Bathsheba, and David, his father, saw her, pursued her. She was married to another man, but he pursued her anyway. And then he killed her husband so that he could marry her. Horrible. The first child they had passed away, but then they had 3 more, and then they had Solomon. He's the 5th. But David had other brothers too from other wives. And you see, it's interesting when you read about their family tree, 2 of Solomon's older brothers tried really hard to take out their dad because they really wanted to be king. Absalom was the first. When we read in the end of 2 Samuel and parts of Kings and Chronicles, we read about Absalom as this young man who does evil in the family, but then he tries really hard to stir up a rebellion and take out his father because he wanted to be king. Well, then after Absalom's gone, then another son does it after him, Adonijah. Adonijah is just a little bit older than Solomon from another mom. He's a half-sibling of Solomon, and Adonijah does the same exact thing. He tries to stir up a rebellion to take out their father. He actually goes around telling people that he's king. And then through all of that, Solomon is appointed king because the Lord told David, make Solomon the next king. And so I can't help but wonder through all this messed up family tree that there's a huge part of Solomon where his brothers really hated that he was picked. I kind of think of Joseph, like in Genesis, where Jacob had all these sons, but then he had Benjamin and Joseph, and Joseph was kind of the loved, he was the favorite child, and it wasn't Joseph's fault, but their dad put favoritism out, and it ruined the whole bunch, and all of his brothers went against him. I wonder if for Solomon, because even one of his brothers, Adonijah, comes against him when he's king. And Solomon actually has to kill his own brother because of the rebellion that he's trying to lead against him. I can't help but wonder if when Solomon becomes king, there's all these messages of how, he is the wrong pick. And how how dare that the youngest son of the relationship that brought grief and shame on their whole family, how dare that the youngest son of that relationship be made king? I wonder if, and again, just in Andre's wondering, if there's these deep messages of not being able to do anything, not being smart enough or wise enough, which is why he asked the Lord for wisdom. And I wonder if there's this need inside of him to prove himself, which is why when the Queen of Sheba comes and visits, there's this change in his heart of, wow, I've impressed someone that no one else has ever been able to impress. And I wonder if it begins to feed this insecurity, this lie, this ego inside of him to prove that he is more than just a child born of a horrible thing. I wonder if he has to prove that the sins of his father have not been passed on to him, that he is different. I wonder if there's this sense that he needs to show everyone that he is not a failure. And then that begins to lead him into this posture where for much of his leadership, he was honoring the Lord. But then when he started to impress others and the recognition started to come, then his heart started to fall away from the Lord. Friends, understand that it must be at the end of his life that he awakens this reality of what he has wanted, this burning, gaping hole inside of him, that he felt like he was never enough, that his life was never enough. And now he sits at the end of his life with all this regret, which is why he writes Ecclesiastes, and he talks about how everything is so meaningless. And we can't help but ask the question, well, then what makes life worth living for? And he makes this so clear at the end of Ecclesiastes in chapter 12. He talks about over and over again, he's like, remember the one who made you. Live to honor him. Live for the Lord. This beautiful message that I hope that we can understand. And when we talk about wanting to experience this contentment from God, understand that we experience God's gift of contentment by seeing our life as fully belonging to Jesus. For a lot of us, we keep this whole like God and Jesus church thing on the side, and then we try to be a good person over here. We're still in control. But understand that Jesus invites us to something totally different, where we are his. And there's this beautiful promise in John chapter 15 where Jesus is talking about how you remain in me and I remain in you. He says, give me all of you, and then I'm going to give you all of me. It's this beautiful exchange where relationship with God is not a one-way street where we have to do all this to God and hope that we please him. It's this two-way, beautiful relationship where he says, give me all of you, and then I'm going to give you all of me. I don't know your story. I don't know what you're trying to prove. I don't know the pain that you're still carrying. I don't know the messages that are rambling around inside that you're not enough, you're never going to be enough, that your life is not enough, that it's not good enough. I don't know what is sabotaging your mind, but let me tell you, Jesus wants to bring this beautiful gift of joy and peace and this message of peacefully accepting our lot in life. As what Solomon said there at the end, it's this sense of whatever is my lot in life, I will take it peacefully. Whatever, if things are great, then praise God. If things are hard, then still praise the Lord. If maybe things are not going the way I want them to, if maybe there's a diagnosis that I'm struggling with, or maybe there's tearing apart in my family, or there's this gaping hole in my life where people have hurt me, whatever it may be, contentment doesn't mean that we just kind of sit and we don't wish for change. We still look to the Lord to bring change and to bring newness, but it's this safe place of belonging. When we say, Lord, no matter what happens next, I am all yours. Even if you answer my prayers and bring healing, I'm all yours. And even if you don't, I'm still all yours. This joy we receive, this gift of contentment by seeing our life as fully belonging to Jesus, is something that few find. That is why Jesus says that the road, people are going to take the wide, narrow road of doing kind of faith with God one way, but then there'll be this narrow road, and few will find it. Listen, I urge you. I don't know what you see when you look in the mirror. Maybe there is regret. Maybe there is a wish I would have done it different. I urge you, start now. See your life as fully belonging to Jesus. Or tomorrow when we go to work, we say, Lord, I'm all yours. And who I am and who you're making to me to be, all of it is yours. When I head into my home or head into school, All of who I am is yours. What if this beautiful invite from the Lord began to radically transform what it was like to be alive? Where we didn't just live for the weekends, or we lived for another beverage, or we lived for another trip, or lived for another this, but we lived for the Lord, and it brought this joy and peace and satisfaction in our soul that we could just not even imagine. What if? Friends, I'm going to go ahead and invite you to stand, and we're going to pray here in a moment.